Today, we're looking at Noodler's 54th Massachusetts. Hi, I'm an ink guy, and my name's Adam. I said that backwards. I get inks, I test them, and I share the results with you. Noodler's 54th is a blue-black ink. Before we get to the writing sample, let's look at some of the sciencey bits about this ink. Up first is a chromatography, and I agree with Vita that I've learned a lot by doing multiple chromatography tests. The one on the left is done the way it's supposed to be done. I put some of the ink down, I immediately dunk it into water for 10 to 15 seconds to watch it creep up. And here we see that it is very strong with the force. It really stays in place. Some of that blue-black moves up, but not a whole lot. The one on the right, I let dry for 10 minutes before I dunk it into the water, and then I let it be there for 10 to 15 seconds. And we see that it barely budges at all. This is a very strong, permanent blue-black, and I love this particular blue-black for that reason. Resistance tests are done to see how it can be expected to hold up on paper and how hard it might be to clean out of my pens. I let the smear dry for 3 days before testing it. Now looking at the highlighter, you see it does not budge at all. One of the nice things of these permanent qualities is if you are a note taker for any reason and then have to go back and highlight, it's not going to destroy what you wrote. The water barely affects it at all. There's nothing on this. And we saw that in the chromatography. We could expect it. Now pen flush got it moving, not a ton. Definitely is picking it up. It's showing some of the white through the paper. Given time, we could probably get it all to go away. The bleach didn't seem to really get it moving at all, but it's definitely picking it up. So it's strange, it seems backwards here that the flush moves it much more than the bleach does. I don't know what would happen with extended time with the bleach. Now this is a bell curve for normal distribution. For the 365 inks I tested, I found an average viscosity of 2.5. Keep in mind that normal is 2.1 to 2.9. That means it's one standard deviation away from that average right in the middle. Now, Noodler's 54th Massachusetts has a viscosity of 1.61. That means when we look at it on here, we see that it is definitely a very fast flowing ink. It's getting closer and closer to the blue line that shows water, which has a viscosity of 1. It's in that red region. You can see it with the white line. Now this bell curve is for the average dry time of inks. I compared all 365 inks tested, found an average dry time of 17 seconds, with the normal range being from 13 to 21 seconds. Noodler's 54th Massachusetts has an average dry time of 9 seconds. That means it's a very fast drying ink. This also means it might seep into some of your cheaper papers faster, but it also performs quite well on those cheaper papers, on almost every paper. I find the average dry time by averaging my extra fine and medium nib during the writing samples that I do on Clairefontaine, Tomoe River, and Rhodia paper. Now let's look at the writing sample. I got this ink in bottle form. This was very early in my purchasing where I would wind up buying bottles a little more than I should have, but I got this bottle because I heard so many good things about Massachusetts 54th that I actually started with a bottle, and I've gone only down to about here on it. It's not a bad blue-black. It's not my favorite blue-black, but it is not bad. I do like blue-black inks, but this is a good performing one. So I'll probably get to using it more, because as I look back on these writing samples, I see that it actually performed better than I was remembering it. So I'm looking at this, and again, I do my writing samples where I start out with a Jinhao 159 1.1 stub from Goulet, where I write the manufacturer's name and the ink name. I use the Jinhao X450 with a Goulet medium nib and a Jinhao X750 with a Goulet extra fine nib. Now looking at this writing sample, starting at the top with the 1.1, I get some nice color variation. I just didn't remember it in this way, but I do get some nice color variation on the 1.1, on that 54, on the Noodlers, not in the middle of the Massachusetts, but right at the H down in the Hussets. At the Hussets, I get some color variation going on. The extra fine gives a nice, straightforward, very businessy color. Very businessy color, and I use this a lot at school when I have to sign paperwork with students that have support needs. I wind up using this color a whole lot at school, so it's really nice with that. It took 6 seconds to dry. Another nice thing about this ink is it didn't seem to take forever to dry for me. I do get moments of color variation. Now, I know I love shading in ink, and this ink doesn't seem to have a whole lot of shading here, but we do get a lot of cheap copy paper at school. So what we're looking at is exactly how it performs on certain things. Clairefontaine, no bleed, no ghosting. It's what we expect. That medium nib, the medium nib starts giving us much nicer color variation. We get it on the, we get it at the end of the quick, we get it on the fox, we get it on the jump. We get it on the, lazy, and dog. So I'm seeing a lot more color variation than I remember when I dealt with this ink before, and I just haven't looked back on it in a little while. This writing sample for me is months old, and I just don't remember seeing this much, and I've sort of avoided the ink, and I don't know why. That medium took 10 seconds to dry on Clairefontaine. Looking at the scrubby, we get a decent amount of color variation. And when I look at the smudge, I could definitely recover that. If I smudged while writing, I would definitely be able to see it. So if I'm looking at Tomoe River, no bleed, a little bit of ghosting, always get ghosting with Tomoe River. I don't know if there's a time I don't get ghosting with Tomoe River. Good color variation through the top. On that 1.1 stub, good amount of color variation. I get it on the 54, the of Massachusetts, the tuts on the end. So we get some spots on the extra fine, very little color variation occurs. I do see it a little on the X. I see it a little on the K. My Ks and my X's seem to get some color variation. On the medium, definitely more color variations going on. A whole lot more color variation. So this is a great pen or a great nib for this particular ink. That extra fine did not seem to do it for me. But looking at the medium, very nice in how it works through. 19 seconds to dry. Again, great color variation, but we get no spread on any of this stuff. We do have, I'm going to say varying performance depending on paper, and we'll see some of that as we go through. No color variation in the scrubby of the fine. None whatsoever. I would not be able to recover that as a smudge. On the medium, we get some. I would not be able to recover that at all on the smudge. When you get to the Rhodia, looking at the Rhodia, no bleed, no ghosting, normal Rhodia performance. It's one of the reasons it's a staple in a fountain pen community. Looking at the 1.1 stub, again, the 1.1 is giving us decent spots of variation. So we get it again around the 54. We get it towards the end of the Noodlers. The middle of Massachusetts has some. On the extra fine, we get spots. The middle of the end of quick, fox. On the again, the ZY of lazy, and on the 4 seconds, we get it. This dried really fast on Rhodia paper. I wish I was keeping track of the color or of the temperature and humidity when I was doing this. Medium, again, a lot more color variation. Much better looking. Again, I don't know why I haven't been using more of this ink. I have to get this ink back into my rotation. I think this might be one of my favorite blue blacks. It fell out of favor. We tend to do that. I had it. I was disappointed with some of it in its performance. It's coming back just looking at this writing sample. Nice color variation in the scrubby of the fine. Great color variation on the medium. I don't know that I'd be able to recover on the smudge. I smudge when I'm writing. That's it. It might be over. Okay? So on a traveler's notebook paper, now I have two kinds. I have the light and I have the regular. There's a little bit of a difference between them, but I'm going to look at the regular one right here. So if we're looking at the regular one, try and clean that up, get the back thing out of the way. No bleed. Starts to want to bleed on the underside of the scrubbies, but not doing bad.
That Traveler's Notebook paper is very nice. We do have some show through. It's not horrible. If you're carrying this around as a notebook, I think you can live with this amount of show through without a problem. As far as the paper itself, we never see any feathering. We don't see any spread. We do get some shading across the board. Again, in that 54th, again in Massachusetts. On the extra fine, we get it in the quick. Not so much through the middle at the end of over. We get some on the lazy and some on seconds. Only 3 seconds to dry here. I don't know if this is sold as a fast dry ink, but this is a fast drying ink. The medium, much nicer, darker color. I love when an ink can give me different shades based on what that nib is. It's great for me when that happens. I just enjoy it. The fine scrubby gets nice color variation. It looks like I can recover it. I don't think it's showing as well on camera here, but I am seeing these downward lines without a problem. I'm seeing them okay, not as well on the medium. More ink. Maybe it just spreads easier. The color variation that's happening there, fantastic. Fantastic color variation. I need to put this one back into my rotation. This is the 20-pound copier paper. I really don't include this a whole lot in my test, but I do here just because I deal with it at school teaching so frequently. We get bleed, not full bleed, very heavy bleed. I just don't worry about how that happens at school. So what happened is I wrote here at the top, this was written with medium, so I got the Noodler's 54th, and we got really a lot of bleed here, a lot of bleed. We get a ton of show through. So this is not something that, when you're taking a ton of your notes, I buy Rhodia pads. I just take Rhodia pads to be able to take my notes for everything I do at school. When I'm working, I just use that. I deal with the fact that I pay a little bit more for paper. Life's too short for cheap paper. Stop using this stuff. America, stop. Bad stuff. This is a 20-pound copier paper. Absolutely no color variation, no shading whatsoever anywhere on this entire thing. It does spread. When we look at the thickness between the extra fine on the Travelers, it's closer to a medium. Closer to a medium on a 20-pound paper. I don't even bother putting the medium nib on here because I know that's just a bloody mess. It looks like I killed someone. Again, still have spread. Spread is not horrible. It's not horrible here, but look, I don't see a ton of, I don't see a ton of feathering on this ink, on this paper. So while it's bleeding through, and that's not the nicest thing in the world, it's not the end of the world to me. Not when I'm just signing some paperwork, but it doesn't bleed all over the place. So this is not too bad for that cheap copy paper if you can live with the bleed. If you are not writing on both sides and you are not using a gusher of a pen, it's going to bleed through. It did not bleed through and hit the next page, but it is going to bleed through. So that's it for our writing sample.
Instead of finding inks that look like Noodler's 54th Massachusetts, I prefer to find an ink that would complement its blue on the page. It's blue, even though it's a blue-black, the blue of that page. With Noodler's 54th Massachusetts being a blue-black ink, I've chosen Robert Oster Astorquiza Rot because of its red color. I felt that blue-black that's mostly blue with the red is a nice contrast. Before I give my opinion on this ink, I'm asking, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. And if it's your first time here, I invite you to subscribe. To make sure I have a range of experience with this ink, I do the writing samples. I then ink a different pen and use it for a day. I then ink it into a different pen to take my notes for this video. I used a Retro 51 Tornado with a broad nib to take my notes. So what do I think of Noodler's 54th? It performs well on all papers that I've used it on. It performs well in most every nib. I have found some spread when I use it on a very broad, wet nib. So I keep that in mind, and I don't tend to actually put it into broad, wet pens anymore because I don't care how it looks. But that doesn't make it bad. It's still a great ink. You have to just match your inks and your pens together. So what's the big question? Would I buy a bottle of this ink? Yes, absolutely. I have a bottle. I'm glad I have a bottle. I use that quite a bit. It is one of my, if not my favorite, blue-black inks. But it's not for everybody. So you should really always try it in a sample before you commit to a bottle. Don't trust what I like. Don't trust what anybody else likes. Try a sample. Move from there. Thank you.